Hi students, in this video we shall be discussing the solutions of CM2A which had come in IFOA April 2021 examinations. So let's take a look at the first question. It was a pretty straightforward question. So in the first part we need to calculate the shortfall probability below 720 and the 99.5% value at risk. So let's take a look at the solution for this. X follows normal 0.07 comma 0.055 square. So the first part is to calculate the shortfall probability. So it's basically 800 into x plus 1 less than 720. X is nothing but the returns. So remember that the amount of money after a year would be nothing but 800 into x plus 1. So on calculating, you'll basically get the answer as point 0.0009973. Next part for the VAR, we are defining first profit, which is nothing but 800 into 1 plus x minus 800, which basically comes down to 800x. So just applying the standard formula, what we get is t is nothing but minus 57.3352. And we know that VAR is nothing but minus t. So the 99.5% VAR is 57.3352. One important thing is there's another way to represent the answer where you can state that the 99.5% VAR is actually what 800 minus 57.3352, which comes out to be basically 742.6648. So the chances of the chances of the amount of money to be less than 742.6648 after 1 year is less than 0.5%. So that is another way to frame it. Why I'm mentioning this is because in the consequent parts, instead of working with the loss or the profit figure, we're actually working with the amount of money which the person has after a year. Part 3 is like to calculate the expected payoff. So that is pretty straightforward. 730 into probability of this scenario plus 750 into probability of this scenario plus 962 into probability of this scenario. So these all three scenarios constitute the entire possibilities. So one way is first to compute this probability where x is less than minus 7.1%. Then you compute x is greater than 7%, and the middle scenario basically will be nothing but 1 minus this, the first case, minus the last case. So taking a look at the solution, expected payoff 730 into respective probability plus 750 into respective probability plus 962 into respective probability. Computing this, substituting these values, we get to be nothing but 855.89684. Part 3 is we need to calculate in respect of the payoff from the derivative, the shortfall probability below a value of 720 and the 99.5% value at risk. So one observation which you should always keep in mind while solving these questions is just look at it. One part A, B, we have been asked to calculate similar thing for another investment. So the next logical thing which while processing in our mind is ki, yeah, there might be a comments part coming, and that is what exactly part 4 does. We need to basically comment how the investor may choose between these two investments. So based on the value at risk, based on the shortfall probability value, and even based on, let's say, the expected value, we have to make inferences of these. So as for calculating shortfall probability, we clearly see that the investment value or the payoff is always greater than 720. So the shortfall probability comes out to be 0. To calculate the 99.5% VAR, we go by the standard technique of getting the less than probabilities, and then we select that maximum value which satisfies this particular thing to be less than 0.5%. So in this case, it comes out to be 730 itself because this is greater than 0.5%. So my 99.5% VAR is 730. So coming to the comments part, how to make the comments, we see that shortfall probability of 720 is greater for first investment compared to second. So if we're using shortfall probability, we'll prefer the second investment opportunity compared to first. As for VAR, we see that the first one has a higher VAR compared to the second one. So we would prefer the first investment opportunity going by that. And if suppose you are ignoring the risk side and just looking at the expected return side, in that case, again, we would be going with the first investment because it has a mean return of 7%, which makes basically my expected value to be nothing but 800 into 1.07, which is nothing but 856. Whereas in the second part, what we're getting is slightly lower than 856. So this is how you need to go about commenting this part. So well prepared candidates were able to, provide a really good comment for part 4 of this question. Next question, part 2. So this is one of the questions which quite a few of students, really struggled in, because they saw that there is dividend and we really don't know how to go about this dividend. But the fact is, if any one of you has maybe gone through, our questions which we give for paper B, so this particular question was there, not exact same type, but a similar type where dividends are there. Again, dividends are something which are being done more extensively in paper SP6. Another thing, given it's an open book exam, so you all could also, just Google it out. So if you just Google, how to go about dealing with European options, with dividend, European call options, having dividend payments through binomial tree, you could have actually got the technique to do that. Right. So these are the various ways in which one can do. You might think this was not there in material dividend paying, but again, if it's not there, if it has been given, you need to see how to go about that. So here a simple thing had to be done, nothing else. U, D, Q, all of these would be computed as normal. Only once you're computing the payoff, you need to just subtract a 4, because this dividend of 4 is being paid just before expiry. So any one of you who maybe follows financial markets and knows the underlying working of how dividends work in real life, uh, on the date when this dividend amount is being adjusted with the stock price, known as the ex dividend date, on that day what happens is the last day's stock price gets subtracted by the dividend amount and it starts trading from that particular value. So let's say here, if after 6 months the value is 120 of the stock price, okay, just before expiry, and then there's a dividend of 4, so the stock price will be nothing but 120 minus 4, which is 116, and then you can simply compute. So this would only affect what your particular payoffs, nothing else. So now coming to first part, state the difference between American and European options. Pretty straightforward. Americans can be exercised anytime, whereas European can be exercised only on expiry. Part 2, calculate the risk neutral price of the option using a binomial tree. So taking a look at the solution, 120 can become 150 or 96. 150 can further become 187.5 or 120. Similarly, 96 can become either 120 or 76.8. R is given to be 0. There's a dividend of 4 at time t equal to 6 months just before expiry. Q can be usually computed. No adjustment needs to be taken for dividend as such. And you get this as 4 by 9. The strike price is 120. It's a 6-month call option. So now what you see is my strike price is 120. This is 187.5. So this is the only scenario under which the call option would be exercised. So normally the payoff would have been 187.5 minus 120, which comes out to be 67.5. But a dividend of 4 is being made. So this would be adjusted in a lower stock price. So the resulting stock price incorporating for dividend would result into what? 183.5. So basically your payoffs will become 187.5 minus 4 minus 120, which comes out to be 63.5. And in all other cases, it shall be 0, since it would be basically equal to or less than the strike price. So we not directly putting the formula e to the power minus 2r, so on. R is nothing but 0, so this comes out to be 1. Computing, we get approximately to be 12.54. Next part basically asks us to calculate the volatility implied by the option price. There are two techniques. One is that if you recall that when UD is equal to 1, which is the case here. Here U is 1.25 and D is 0.8. The product of this becomes 1. In that case, U can be expressed as, let's say, exponential sigma root delta T. So that is one way to do that. If you're using that particular technique, you would probably get sigma as 33%. I'm not sure, one of my students had performed this calculation. So he was getting around 33%. Another way is used to basically use the Black-Scholes model. So using Black-Scholes model, you have CT, ST, K, R, everything is there. So you have 12.54 is equal to 125 D1 minus 125 D2. you can maybe try from sigma different values. So I tried it with first 30%, then I tried it with 40%. I interpolated between these and I got what? My answer to be close to 36%. Again, some of you might have used Excel to calculate these. It's of 2 marks. I'm not really sure whether the examiners would be allowing students to using, goal seek function from Excel and giving the answers. That is something which is slightly subjective. The ones who would have used that will result into an exact answer of 37.15%. So again, that method using certain functions of Excel for calculation of these is something which I'm not sure whether examiners would be giving full credit for. So apart from that, if you try normal through trial and error, you would be getting an answer of 36%. Next, part 4, state the benefits of using a risk neutral derivative pricing approach, 2 marks. So the first part, it's an easy method. That's one of the benefits. Second benefit is uh, we do not need to know what should be the appropriate, what to say, the non-risky rate which should be used for discounting. Since we're using a risk neutral approach, we use the risk neutral probabilities, we use the risk-free rate of interest, so we do not have to bother about deciding on which particular rate of interest should be used, keeping in mind the risk factors. And also there is no need for the real world probabilities. Part 5 is why it might be difficult to price the option using Black-Scholes option pricing model. So first of all, the model in Black-Scholes model, what we assume is that if it's a dividend if it's a dividend paying underlying asset, then we assume that dividends are paid continuously. But here certainly that is not the case. There is only a discrete dividend which is taking place and not a continuous one. So that is one of the difficulty which we would have while pricing this particular option if we use Black-Scholes model. Then now we consider an American option on the same underlying share with all other parameters unchanged. Explain why you may expect the price of the American option to be different to your answer in part 2. So as we know that the American option gives us more flexibility as we are able to exercise it before expiry as well. In case of non-dividend paying, we know that it does not make sense to exercise an call option early. But in case of a dividend paying option, it actually at times would make sense to exercise an American call option early. And to be precise, the best time to exercise would be just before the payment of dividend. So here, if we have an American call option, it would result into a higher valuation compared to that of a European call option. Part 7 is calculate the price of an American put option. Again, that's pretty straightforward. So what we need to understand here is we had 187.5, 120, and 76.8. This 120 needs to be adjusted by a dividend of 4 to get 116, and this 76.8 again needs to be adjusted by dividend, and this will result into 72.8. So therefore the payoffs will be 120 minus 116, which is 4, and 120 minus 72.8, which is nothing but 47.2. And now we calculate using the normal formula which we have, and we get an answer of roughly 16.54 till 2 decimal places. Again, a lot of students simply saw ki it's a dividend, so they didn't really attempt this question or thought ki this is pretty difficult. So again, part 1 was something which could be pretty much well addressed. Part 4, part 5 could be done. Part 5 again would have required some sort of higher analytical thinking with respect to treatment of dividend, but part 4 and part 1 was something which could have easily been solved. And as for the other parts, just if students had time after solving other questions, which I realized that they would not have, because honestly this was a pretty different CM2 paper given its online format. We were back to having a substantial amount of theory and comments based. If I'm not wrong, it was close to, let's say, around 35 to 40% of the paper, so which was pretty different from the previous session and something which the students were not expecting. And it actually took a lot of time. Even when I solved it on paper, it took me around 2.5 to 3 hours, and obviously had I been solving it on MS Word, it would have taken much more time. So again, the extremely well prepared candidates would have got this question correct, or ones maybe who have other background from through virtue of certain courses like CF or FRM, or maybe some of the ones who have actually just gone through the material of SP6 might know the way, or anyone else who might have the presence of mind to Google it out. They could have actually got the technique to solve part 2 of this question. Next, part 3 Again, pretty straightforward this one was. I guess most of my students were able to attempt this question completely, pretty straightforward. So I'll directly jump to the solution part. We need to find variance of A and B. So variance A comes out to be 0.000576. Variance B comes out to be 0.0009. Then we had to compute shortfall probability. This was 0.23328 for in the case of X and 0.27426 in the case of Y. Excuse me. As for the comments part, explain which asset the investor should choose. So since this investor has a quadratic utility function, it means that the investor, given that two different assets have the same mean, will opt for that asset which has a lower variance. So in that case, what we would be using is basically nothing but the variance of the return to compare these things. So now part 3 is the investor is considering to split the investments. So part 3, if the assets are independent. If assets are independent, yes, then the investor should decide to split the investments in order to achieve the benefits of diversification. Whereby if you're investing in multiple assets, it results into a construction of a portfolio which has a variance which is lower than that of individual variance of the assets. And in part B, if the assets exhibit some positive correlation, in this case, the investor might or might not split the investment. If short selling is allowed, then it is something that the investor might think of doing, because in this case, it might be possible to create a portfolio which might have a lower variance compared to that of individual assets. Part 4 explain the similarities and differences between basic chain ladder method and inflation adjusted chain ladder method for calculating runoff triangles. Discuss when it would be more appropriate, and then discuss possible reasons why neither may be appropriate for calculating runoff triangles. Again, pretty much direct bookwork. I guess most of the students neglect these theoretical aspects of runoff triangle. They are more inclined to solving the questions which are pretty much straightforward. What they miss out is the underlying assumptions and the similarities and differences between the different models. So again, students who might be from the working ones who might be from a general insurance background, or maybe have studied for paper SP7, this is something which is directly available in the SP7 paper. So either you could use your CM2 material to take a look at this. You could also use Google, since runoff triangles are an extremely common topic, especially even for interviews from GI companies. These are frequently asked. So again, quite a lot of students simply skip this question because they were running short of time. They thought maybe they'll come back and attempt this later, but then that never happened. Part 5, again a pretty direct question, but yes, again, even in the last term we had got a question from utility theory which took a hell lot of time to solve. This question did not take that much amount of time, but again, when it comes to typing on MS Word, it would have taken some amount of time, specifically in part 3, to compute the value of D. Otherwise, had this been on paper, it would have been pretty much straightforward to calculate. So we'll just directly go to the answer, since it's a pretty straightforward question, no trick involved. First part simply we need to find the upper value, which is standard thing. One thing you need to realize is that D is negative, so while dividing both sides by D, the sign of inequality changes. Then we are assuming this investor to be risk averse, so the second derivative of utility function should be negative. This will only happen when D is negative. Part 3. So what we're doing is current wealth is $100. 7 boxes has been bought, and each box price is $10. So basically, what happens is that this particular person has $30 remaining and has 7 boxes which can be sold at different prices. And it has also been given in the question that there is expected utility of wealth of 50 after selling them. So now these boxes can be either sold for 30 or 12 or 10 or 0.5. Based on this, we find the expected wealth. All the 4 outcomes are equally likely as given in the question. So we have the 4 different wealth values. Next part is to find the expected wealth and equate it to 50. We do that, and then computing for D, we get it to be minus 0.003518, taking it till 6 decimal places. Part 4, calculate the expected utility of wealth of the investor if not buy any vegetables. In that case, the investor has only 100 rupees. So U100 is nothing but 64.82. Note that here the investor, okay, first of all, if we'll find the expected payoff, if he does not sell the, what to say, the vegetables or the boxes, he or she will have 100 amount of wealth. And in case he or she does sell the boxes, the expected wealth will be greater than 100, right? One thing, but we clearly see that having 100 rupees in certain gives a higher utility compared to taking on that particular risk, because it results into an expected utility of only 50. So if I'm assuming that this investor is risk averse, right, if I'm assuming that this investor is risk averse, so he or she should basically try to what, maximize his utility, expected utility. But clearly the question states that the investor has decided to want to buy 7 boxes of vegetables. So what this means is the particular utility function which we're using is not being able to correctly capture the behavior of the investor. Because had this been so, in that case, buying 7 boxes of vegetables should have result into a utility function leading to a expected utility, which would have been more than that in the case when he would not have sold the boxes. So it should have been actually greater than 64.82. So again, students would have generally struggled, in part 5 of this. Otherwise, extremely well prepared students could have been, able to infer these. Again, the difference between candidates being able to attend these or not primarily comes from the fact whether they were able to, complete the other questions in a time-bound manner. Because these type of comments is something you should actually come back and, attempt later if you're not getting it instantly. So, next, question 6, again direct from Ruin theory, extremely scoring question. This could be possibly one of the easiest questions which could have come from Ruin theory. So directly jumping into the derivation, C represents nothing but the premium received by the insurer. X follows gamma 2 comma 1. Directly from actuarial tables, we know it will be 1 minus T by lambda whole to the power minus alpha. We substitute the values of alpha and lambda. And remember that T is less than lambda is a condition which you always should give. There's always a constraint on T, what values it can take or not take for MGF to be valid. So remember to give that, else the examiner might deduct half a mark or more than that depending upon the quantum of marks for the available for the question. So it's very important to be technically correct to give this particular range for which the MGF is actually valid. So solving this, we basically get two values of R. We know that R is a non-negative value, rather it's a positive value. So basically the value comes out to be nothing but 1.81. Next, question 7, a question from behavioral finance. This came after a long time, uh, and it was slightly different from the new content. Previously there was a different syllabus for behavioral finance before 2019. After 2019 there has been certain more new introductions to it as well. So which of the following behavior biases are exhibited? So the first part, what we basically see is, just let me take a look at my notes. First one is the self-serving bias. So it's again directly one could refer to the material to understand actually what is happening, and the explanation of same is the manager is crediting the good performance before because of his or her ability, but blaming external factors or forces for negative what to say, for poor performance of same or for negative results. Part 2, it could be basically isolation effect, wherein the investor is basically looking at the 75% of portfolio which has produced a 3% return. But if an overall thing is let's say, what to say, observed, the other 25% has loss, and a significant amount of loss, a 50% loss. So overall, if this investor sees he or she is having actually a negative returns, but this investor is basically excluding that part, so it could be basically isolation effect bias. Other potentially behavior biases might could also be used, and it depends upon the examiner which of these are best describing this particular scenario. Part 3, again primarily we could say herd behavior. Again, something which I through my writings or through my videos keep saying is something students, or in fact anyone, should not follow this herd mentality. So here what is happening is, just because the other modeling teams of other companies are using a particular modeling technique, so even of this particular insurance company, they continue to use this modeling technique even though a better alternative is available. So this is basically herd behavior, and could be to some extent status quo as well, because it might be, although small reason key, they're continuing with the same model because of just being, status quo and not willing to change. As for the last part, it could be anchoring and adjustment behavioral bias, because the actuary has actually, no prior knowledge of equity risk modeling and still is strongly opposing this new model, only because it has fixated its entire argument on the previous model suggesting a 10% loss, whereas the new one suggests 25% loss. How to interpret these, how they are different or not, the actuary, according to the question, has no knowledge. So this is basically a result of anchoring and adjustment behavioral bias. Next question number 8, again from Ruin. So we got around let's say 15 marks of question of Ruin theory. So quite a few of you know who have a tendency to go for CM2 before CS2, even if you do not have a very strong background of derivatives. And so one of the reasons why I keep saying it's very important for you all to ideally study CS2 first and then CM2. Few of the students obviously can attempt CM2 before CS2 and still they clear it. That is again an exceptional case. You'll find all sort of exceptional students giving all sort of papers in the random order and still clearing it, but it does not negate the fact that it would be more sensible approach to go with CS2 first, generally speaking, before CM2, because CM2 draws certain what to say knowledge from CS2, and most of the students skip these, be it the knowledge of reinsurance and risk model, be it the knowledge of Markov chain, Markov jump process, or stochastic process. They tend to skip it. They might have studied it at a very brief level, but to get a complete understanding they have to read the material, which obviously students wouldn't really have the time. So this is again one of the reasons, as I reiterate, go for CS2 before CM2. It makes more sense. Just use the logic key CM2. I mean, you wouldn't go for CS2 before CS1 because it requires knowledge of CS1. Similarly, CM2 does require, not for all chapters, but at least, 5, 6 topics are there, which are testing. So to get a complete understanding, it's very important that, you actually study CS2 before CM2. So taking a look at this, part 1 and 2 pretty straightforward. Part 3 will discuss the appropriateness of the insurer's approach. So what we could see is the insurer is assuming that no future premiums are coming, so we need to check whether this is actually the case or not. Then the insurer is using exponential distribution to entire all the claims in yearly intervals. So we could see if any other better distributions could be used, because we are looking at catastrophes. So catastrophes are nothing but one single event which causes large amount of loss. So these should generally be represented by distributions having thick tails. Exponential distribution does not really have thick tails, so we could think of using maybe a gamma distribution with appropriate parameter of alpha, ideally greater than 1, or let's say Pareto distribution, log normal distribution, which would give us a thicker tails. Another thing is could be instead of looking at yearly intervals, modeling the probability of ruin at yearly intervals, we could do so maybe at more frequent intervals, let's say on a half yearly basis, quarterly basis, monthly basis, or even on a weekly basis, as in what is suitable. As for part 2, without performing any calculation, we have been asked, so we are increasing the parameter of lambda equal to 2. So what we are doing is we're increasing the mean amount of claims. So this will result in a higher amount of, this will result into higher chances of the company being ruined. So this was about question 8. Take a look at the solution of part 1A and B. This is basically it. So we are getting 1. At time 0, obviously it cannot be ruined. So probability of not being ruined is 1. Not being ruined, not ruined, rather not being ruined. And at time 1, it is coming out to be roughly 5%, if I would say. Next, moving on to the 9th question. Lagrangian came again. This is, although I wouldn't say easy, it's straightforward. It takes a lot of time even on paper to solve it, and to do it on Word actually would take a lot of time. So even while I was solving this question, just one error I made. Instead of taking 800 in the denominator, I took 100. Then I was not getting the answer. Good thing was I know that the new efficient frontier, should pass through these 2 points. But the fact is, had this not been there, I would have not even cross-checked if my workings were fine or not, because there was just one simple error where instead of 800, I took 100. So I had to redo that part, which took around 5 to 6 minutes more than the usual time. So again, this was a direct question, but again, since this had to be solved on MS Word using Lagrangian, alternate methods could be used. I simply prefer to use Lagrangian technique whenever there are three or more than three assets, because that's a foolproof way. Another way is to find the gradient. First, find the combination of risky assets, and then we use the fact that whenever a risk-free asset is available, the efficient frontier would be nothing but a straight line, which would be tangent to the efficient frontier consisting of risky asset itself. So that could be used, something which is there in the institute material as well. So taking all through the solutions for the same. Market price of risk is EM minus R by sigma. Please make sure to define these symbols. And then next part you all can see pretty much straightforward, part 2. So what we'll get is basically EP comes out to be 0.05 plus 0.25 sigma P. And by substituting these 2 points, we see that both the sides are getting equal, which means that these points actually lie on the line. Now for part 3, we need to use Lagrangian. So you can take a look at the workings. You might wish to pause the video and take a look at the workings. So the place where I actually made the mistake, as you could see, there's an overwriting is I have a tendency to do things in my head and avoid using calculator. I end up using calculator to cross check my answers on the day of exam, but I always prefer for certain normal multiplication, division, or addition, subtraction to do it mentally. So there I had to take LCM of 160 and 100, or rather I was trying to make it till 800, but then I did 100. So that was one mistake and I was not getting the answer. Later I checked the steps and then I realized, okay, there's the mistake here. So this was coming out to be mu is 800 EP minus 40 divided by 29. Next, we simply need to find XA, XC, substitute this in VP. Again, while solving this, you'll realize that this 800 EP minus 40 whole square is something which is common. So let's not expand it, keep it as it is, because it will help us later. What you need to understand is the moment you have a risk-free asset, your resulting solution will be nothing but a straight line. So since VP is sigma P square, here also we should get a direct square term so that sigma P equals to something, and from there we can get nothing but a form of a straight line. So we get this VP. I'm taking this 800 out, squaring it out. So finally what we get is sigma P is nothing but 20 by root 29 whole into EP minus 0.05. And given the points, if we'll put it on both the sides, you'll see that LHS matches RHS, and therefore this fact is in fact lying on the new efficient frontier. So again, part 3 of this question was a lot of students, due to the there not being sufficient time, missed out on this. Otherwise, this was something which could have been scored in full. Next is question number 10. Part 1A, what this tells it about, from stochastic dominance. So here what I have done is I'll just show you all how to, go about giving citation. This is one way of giving citation. Okay, so I do not have the PDF of these, so I'll just take you all through. A exhibits first order stochastic dominance over portfolio B. So if we directly refer to the material I had taken down from there itself, what it means about portfolio A and B. So I directly took that from there, and towards the end I wrote that this particular line has been taken from acted CM2 material 2019 version, chapter number 3, page number this, section maybe this. That was it. Part 1B is why a non-satiated investor will prefer portfolio A to portfolio B, because a non-satiated investor is one which always prefer more returns to less returns, and therefore it will prefer that particular portfolio which stochastically first order dominates another portfolio. Now, if portfolio A also exhibits second order stochastic dominance, then what are the requirements on an investor? So if you would have gone through the material carefully, you would have seen that the requirements are that the investor should be risk averse. And part three is, assume that now portfolio B returns either -5% or 10% with equal probability. Set out how you may determine a distribution that a return on portfolio A could take such that A is second order stochastic dominant over B. So one way is ki maybe we could take a return of, let's say, -4% and 11%, or I would say -4% and 10%, kept one of the returns same, and we would have increased the other with same set of probabilities, which would have resulted in getting rather an asset which both first order and second order stochastically dominates B. Another thing could be to, might be to keep the returns equal but increase the probability of one of them. This could be, another way to do that. So overall, CM2 fairly different type of questions were there. Typically, from stochastic behavior, behavioral finance, then stochastic dominance, sorry, behavioral finance. Then there were no questions from chapter 9, 10, 11, or 18, 19, but this was reflected in paper B where questions from these were asked. So obviously there are 21 chapters. It's not possible to cover all the topics. So year on year, there might be variation, which is pretty normal. There would be certain variability happening. So students, should be prepared for all of these. So overall, coming to the passing marks, it could be anywhere between 57 to 60. For some reason, CM2, even when there are slightly difficult papers, continues to have a passing marks, which is generally in the higher range. That is, you wouldn't really see it coming down to 57 or 56 or 58. It generally has been 60. And if I'm not wrong, for CT8 or even CM2, it has been once or twice 61 or 62 itself. So this term again, I'm just expecting it to be somewhere around 57 to 60. Hope you all did find this video pretty useful. Don't forget to, like this video and comment on same. In case of any errors which you might have observed, or you feel there might be certain errors in our solutions, feel absolutely free to, comment on this video. We'll take a look at that and we'll try to rectify it as soon as possible. And don't forget to subscribe our channel. So thank you. Bye.